This was 1979. We had an effective vaccine, 2 of them, the Salk, but the Sabin in particular for widespread use. And by 1979, we were at the point of having the last case of polio in the United States. I was asked to recommend a immunization that might be useful, and I strongly recommended polio because the vaccine was available. It was easy to give. It was an oral vaccine. You just put basically 2 drops in the mouth. And that was something you could train virtually anybody to do, including the army of Rotarians. We could help financially in providing vaccine and other social mobilization and other activities.
The United States had been faced since the late 1800s with increasingly sizable episodic polio epidemics that swept through the country.
Certain parts of the country would have quite intense polio, and in those areas, of course, there was great fear because of the frequency of the disease.
This was a terror that was struck in the hearts of everyone, and especially parents, because poliovirus is a virus that spreads silently through communities, and it has a summertime peak. There's a very seasonal incidence to it. So in the summertime, you never knew when the poliovirus would sweep through your community. It's an equal opportunity destroyer, from the poorest child to the wealthiest individuals.
We haven't seen polio in this country since about 1979. That is naturally occurring polio.
From 125 countries in 1988 and about 350,000 cases of polio to 10 countries in the world in 2001.
Rotary is a service organization where leaders come together, they exchange ideas on what they can possibly accomplish, and then they take action. Daddy Allen was a Rotarian in Ohio. He had had some tough experiences in his family.
His son had been injured in a streetcar accident.
I think he felt that if the son could have been gotten to a hospital on time, he might have survived.
And he started a program to try and help crippled children.
And crippled children's work, which was his term and Rotary's term as Rotary got involved, was not just about polio, but regardless of whether it was from injury, accident, polio, unknown cause, if children were having trouble walking, there were services that could be provided. Braces, wheelchairs, crutches.
And pretty soon the other Rotary clubs around that part of Ohio picked up on it and said, well, we'd like to have a crippled children's movement in our club. And it spread like wildfire all the way across, especially the mid-Atlantic and northeastern United States.
There started to be discussion about possibly charging certain dues to every Rotary club that chose to become a member. And there began to be a backlash.
It actually divided some of the leadership of Rotary and was actually defeated.
In 1923, Rotary developed something called a Statement on Community Service. And what it said is that local Rotary clubs have autonomy and they choose their own projects.
The impact of Resolution 2334 was basically stop this movement of Rotary's big thing is crippled children's work. Stop that in its tracks. It laid down the law that there could be no global Rotary service projects. Took a long time for scientists to know that polio existed as a distinct disease, a long time to understand it, and then once it was understood, quite a while to develop a vaccine. And there were two different approaches going during the vaccine research period.
Jonas Salk got to the finish line first, so his vaccine was licensed in the United States in a very famous event that took place on April 12, 1955.
The killed virus for polio was given by injection, went into the bloodstream.
Albert Sabin had to wait until 1961 before his oral polio vaccine got licensed in the United States. But it rapidly replaced the Salk vaccine and was routinely recommended in the United States right until the year 2000. Because it's given orally, it sets up an infection in the intestinal tract and confers intestinal immunity, which is the way to protect the population, the community at large, from the spread of the polio virus from person to person silently within the community.
Well, smallpox, of course, which was such a fear disease, produces at least disfigurement, if not death. It's been feared for centuries.
If you were infected with the smallpox virus, virtually 100% of people would manifest the clinical findings of smallpox infection. A fever, often a very high fever, a very characteristic rash. So you could diagnose that and not have to worry about was it smallpox or was it any number of other possibilities. And the other thing is, it wasn't a disease that silently passed through the community.
Then there was this tremendous effort to not only use the vaccine and immunize as it had been used, but to then go on and eradicate it by immunizing around any individuals who had smallpox. So it was great excitement that we'd finally conquered a disease of that devastating quality.
The big lesson was the legacy in terms of people. I came from smallpox. My deputy in EPI came from smallpox. Our regional managers came from smallpox. And there was a esprit de corps, a commitment of moving toward a goal and accomplishing that goal, along with a commitment for evaluation and understanding what went wrong and what does go wrong.
In the 70s into the 80s, there was a big push by UNICEF particularly, but other organizations too, on basic health care, getting primary health care out to the communities.
And they did not want to have a vertical program. They did not want to focus just on a disease or two. They really wanted to emphasize the buildup of more comprehensive health services. We were building up long-term systems that continually provided immunization services for newborns coming in. Each cohort, every year, every month, every day. And so I was not anxious at that point, when we didn't have a system at all in 1977, to be talking about eradication of any of our diseases.
Dr. Halfdan Mahler was a Danish director General of the World Health Organization. He was very much against what are called vertical programs or targeted programs such as polio eradication, and believed that a single disease-focused program was a threat, if not the enemy, to strengthening primary health care.
UNICEF and WHO were able to convene this conference on primary health care in Russia and in the Soviet Union, Alma-Ata.
He led an effort in 1978 that came out with a resolution that the world should strive for health care for all by the year 2000.
So they listed 8 essential elements of primary health care, and they made the emphasis that you really had to do it as a whole. You shouldn't just be choosing one over another. But from the very beginning, even from between WHO and UNICEF, it set up a tension between saying you can't do everything, and we can push hard on water, or we can push hard on immunization, or we can push hard on maternal child health. And you have different constituencies in the world who are interested in each one of those elements, who can be brought on more forcefully for a water project or an immunization project than for something that's comprehensive.
Before I became president, when I was president nominee, I thought a lot about what can I do when I've got the responsibility for leading this organisation of 800,000 people. I'd been to India and to Northwest Africa, and I'd seen the conditions there. And they're horrible. And I just couldn't imagine spending a year doing little things when there's these huge problems to be met.
Back at the beginnings of the effort to eradicate polio, it really took a combination of presidents working over several years together to get this program rolling. There were particularly 3 presidents back in the late 1970s who began the program, who supported each other. They provided the continuity that was necessary and the continuity that's continued to this day.
But I was extremely fortunate to have had the man before me and the man after me strongly in support of the program they believed in, and prepared to make a public stand on it.
Jack Davis had the idea that with the 75th anniversary coming up, it was a time for Rotary to do a bit more than they'd done in the past internationally. And it was also the year of the child that UNICEF were promoting, and so this seemed to fit very well with his thinking. And so he had this idea that they would raise funds, the anniversary fund.
So they decided to fund it with $12 million.
Raise the money in 2 years, spend it in 5. Phase of its life cycle. With the expectation, the intention that that would be the end of it. It was just a special short-term project.
Formed a very high power, very influential committee of senior Rotarians.
I remember getting a call one evening from Clem Reniff that says he was appointing a special committee to explore a new idea called the 3H Committee, Health, Hunger, and Humanity. And he called me one night and said, I'd like for you to represent the educational or the humanity group. And so there were just 3 of us on this committee, and we met in Evanston to consider some kind of a way in which Rotary could do things on a much larger scale than we had ever done before.
And the 3H program was established in conjunction with the 75th Anniversary Fund to support a small number of large international projects.
Our purpose was to tell the story about the availability of these larger grants, $300,000, then encourage people to submit proposals to us of what the clubs would want to do. So it was still a grassroots effort
And it really set Rotary into an altitude that it had never been at before, because it helped Rotarians to think big. It helped us to see beyond just sponsoring the local parade or building a ramp at the library. But Jack Davis, when Clem shared with him his idea for 3H, said, I think it's such a wonderful idea, I suggest you actually bring it right to the board.
The board was also looking for some project which would excite the Rotary world and illustrate to the world around us what Rotary was capable of. And this was the sort of thing that met those criteria.
And the board was so enthusiastic about the 3H program that they actually let Clem present it to the Tokyo Convention at the end of Jack Davis's year.
Announcement of this idea to the Rotarians of the world, very well accepted. I think Rotarians were ready to be a little bit more than just a nice club, willing to do something in an international manner.
It was idealistic. It was way beyond anything we'd ever done, and or most people, organisations ever done.